The smell of roast chicken and buttered potatoes filled the dining room. Grandma waited until everyone had served themselves, then slid a small black flash drive across my plate. Her hand trembled, eyes sharp yet clouded with worry. "Watch it alone, okay?" she whispered. The room carried on as if nothing had happened, but I felt the weight of the moment pressing down. Cold plastic, ordinary to anyone else, now held secrets capable of shattering everything I thought I knew about my family. Her gaze pleaded silently, "Protect me. Understand. Don't let them see you frightened." I started my morning like I always did, the aroma of coffee grounding me, the soft hum of the kettle filling my tiny apartment. The city outside my window was just beginning to stir, car engines muffled by the early fog. I brewed a strong cup, the bitter warmth waking me up, and sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open. Emails piled in, deadlines looming, but my mind kept wandering back to Grandma and that flash drive. By day, I worked at a small design firm downtown. My office overlooked the busy street, people hurrying past like ants, unaware of the world inside my head. I liked my job because it gave me structure, a place to channel my focus. But the routines of emails, client meetings, and project timelines suddenly felt hollow, as though the real urgency waited at home with Grandma. After grabbing my train, I clutched my coffee cup tightly, feeling the heat seep into my palms. The rattling metal of the subway doors and the low murmur of strangers provided an oddly comforting backdrop, but I couldn't stop thinking about the black flash drive in my bag. Each time it nudged against my thigh, I flinched slightly, as if it were alive with secrets. At the office, I tried to settle into design mock-ups, sketches, and presentations, but my mind kept replaying that moment at the dinner table, the tremble in Grandma's hand, the whisper barely audible over the clinking of silverware. My fingers itched to plug the drive into my laptop, but I held back. Not yet. First, I needed to understand her world, her home, the life she'd been protecting all these years. Later, I visited Grandma's apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender, a scent she always used to calm herself. Sunlight poured through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. She shuffled toward me in her slippers, eyes tired but alert. "You're here early," she said, voice soft, almost hesitant. I smiled, helping her with a bag of groceries. As we worked together, unpacking cans and jars, I noticed the meticulous care with which she arranged everything. Each spice, each utensil, each photograph on the mantel had a place, a story, a memory. The house was more than just a living space. It was a carefully curated archive of decades of love, loss, and quiet resilience. I lingered in the kitchen, watching her stir the sauce for dinner, listening to the soft clatter of pots. In the background, a radio played an old jazz tune, the kind she and Grandpa used to enjoy on Sunday mornings. There was something grounding about these small details, a rhythm of life untouched by the greed and manipulation lurking just outside her walls. That evening, we sat at her dining table together, sharing a simple meal. Grandma talked about the old days, her childhood in a small town, meeting Grandpa at a dance, the early years of parenthood. I listened, absorbing her stories, knowing that behind her calm voice lay the strength that had guided our family through countless storms. The flash drive rested in my pocket, a constant reminder of the hidden tension. I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't let it overshadow these moments. I realized then that understanding her, walking through her world with her, was the first step toward uncovering the truth. By the time I left, night had fallen, and the city was awash of streetlights and distant sirens. I walked home slowly, thinking about the life I'd just witnessed, the routines, the care, the quiet dignity. Grandma wasn't just someone to protect. She was a living testament to the values they were trying to steal from her. And now, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing on me, mingling with a rising determination I hadn't felt before. I was no longer just a visitor in her world. I was becoming part of the story she was ready to tell. A story of truth, betrayal, and the slow, deliberate fight for justice. I had known, in the quiet way you only realize in hindsight, that something was off. It started years ago, little things at first, almost imperceptible. My father would casually check in on Grandma's finances, always hovering when she balanced her checkbook. Aunt Linda would call with suggestions for bills or investments, her tone sweet but subtly insistent. Rick would linger during family visits, asking unnecessary questions, always looking for opportunities to pry. At first, I shrugged it off. Families argued, I thought. Everyone meant well. But the unease never left. The first real warning came when I was 15. I had accompanied Grandma to the bank to deposit a check Grandpa had left for her. Dad insisted on coming along for guidance. I remember sitting on the leather bench, pretending to read a magazine while he whispered over her shoulder, suggesting she reconsider, splitting the funds in ways that didn't match Grandpa's wishes. Grandma's jaw tightened, her fingers clutching the check. I wanted to speak up, but the knot in my stomach kept me silent. I felt powerless, small, irrelevant. Over the years, the manipulation became more apparent. Conversations that seemed casual on the surface were laced with pressure. We just want to help, they'd say, but the subtext was always clear. Obey or be left out. I began noticing patterns. The way Dad's voice hardened when she hesitated. Aunt Linda's smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Rick's subtle smirks when she refused their demands. I tried to talk to Grandma about it once. We sat on her floral couch, the afternoon sun slanting through lace curtains. Do you think they're trying to control you? I asked cautiously. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with both sadness and fatigue. I've seen it for years, she said quietly. I want to protect you from seeing it fully. Some battles are better watched from the sidelines. But I couldn't watch from the sidelines anymore. The crushing moment came 2 years ago. I was home for the holidays, sitting in the living room, when Grandma's mail arrived. I had never noticed before how quickly Dad and Linda swooped in, rifling through envelopes under the guise of helping. They opened a letter from the estate lawyer, saw the details of Grandpa's will, and exchanged a look I would never forget. A look of cold calculation. Grandma tried to maintain her composure, but I saw the tremor in her hands as she tucked the letter away. That night, she confided in me, her voice barely above a whisper. They want what isn't theirs. They will stop at nothing. And one day, I may need you to help me. It was the first time I understood the stakes. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about undermining her autonomy, rewriting her reality, and erasing decades of her hard-earned dignity. Then came subtle attempts to alienate me. Dad suggested I was too involved, implying I couldn't be trusted with family matters. Aunt Linda tried to charm me, buying small gifts and using flattery to distract from the manipulation. I realized they had perfected the art of deception. Polite, subtle, invisible, yet devastating. I started paying closer attention. Patterns emerged. Invitations that conveniently excluded Grandma from discussions about her own assets. Casual remarks meant to test her resolve. Hints that I wasn't capable of understanding legal matters. I cataloged it silently, filing each incident in my mind. It was exhausting, watching the person I loved being pressured, belittled, and manipulated by the people who should have cared most. I remember nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, calculating the lies, imagining the consequences. And through it all, Grandma remained strong, refusing to bend, teaching me silently the value of resilience and quiet resistance. By the time I received the flash drive at that family dinner, I knew exactly what I was holding. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was a culmination of years of hidden truths, proof of the betrayal I had suspected, and a call to action I could no longer ignore. The following Sunday, Grandma had insisted I come over for dinner. The weather was gray, drizzle tapping against the window as I parked in the driveway. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and soil, a damp chill seeping into my coat. I carried a small dessert, a lemon tart Grandma loved, trying to calm the nervous knot in my stomach. When I entered the living room, the first thing I noticed was the arrangement of the chairs. They were lined up like a boardroom, papers stacked neatly on the coffee table. Dad, Aunt Linda, and Rick were already there, their postures rigid, expressions carefully neutral. The kind of masks people wear when they think they're winning. It's just the final signatures, Dad said the moment I walked in, his voice clipped. We've been working with Mom to move her accounts into a trust. Grandma's hands rested on her lap, fingers intertwined, knuckles pale. Her eyes flicked to mine, a silent plea for patience, for calm. I forced a smile, setting down the dessert. Which is exactly? I asked, keeping my tone casual. With us, Rick said flatly, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. It's safer if the money is managed collectively. I felt a twist in my stomach. The word collectively was their euphemism for control. They thought the paperwork would intimidate her, make her acquiesce. But Grandma's spine was still straight, her gaze steady, though a flicker of tension passed over her features. Throughout dinner, they tried the usual tactics: soft flattery from Aunt Linda, veiled threats from Dad, Rick's smirks when Grandma resisted their suggestions. Every word, every gesture, was designed to undermine her autonomy. I noticed the subtle shifts: Dad's shoulders stiffening when she disagreed, Aunt Linda tilting her head in faux concern, Rick's eyes darting to see if anyone else was watching. The smell of roast chicken mixed with anxiety. My hand clenched around the fork, its cool metal grounding me while my mind raced. The lemon tart sat untouched on the side, the aroma of citrus sharp in the thick tension. Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line as she signed the final page. The pen scraped softly across the paper, the only sound that truly mattered. I watched, stomach tightening, knowing the submission was forced, her freedom momentarily compromised. After dinner, as dishes were cleared, I asked gently, "Are you okay?" She met my eyes, her expression calm but weary. "I'll be fine," she said, voice low. "It's just exhausting. They'll push, and I have to hold my ground." I nodded, biting back my frustration. I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the subtle rewriting of our family's narrative. Later, when we were alone in the kitchen, she spoke again, her voice almost a whisper above the hum of the refrigerator. "You saw the flash drive, right?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Keep it safe. They may try to manipulate, to lie. But the truth is in your hands now. And someday it may be needed." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me like a physical presence. The fire in my chest began to burn hotter, a resolve that had been simmering for years now igniting fully. Walking home that night, rain soaking through my coat, I realized the stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't simply about a family dispute. It was about reclaiming dignity, ensuring justice, and standing up to calculated manipulation. The flash drive wasn't just proof, it was a lifeline, a beacon of truth I now carried. Every step on the wet pavement felt deliberate, my mind forming strategies, imagining confrontations, considering possible outcomes. For the first time, I felt that quiet, simmering anger transform into focus, into purpose. The conflict wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them win. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster as if the patterns could explain everything. The city outside was quiet, only the occasional siren or distant car breaking the silence. But inside my mind, chaos roared. I thought of Grandma's trembling hand at dinner, the quiet weight of the flash drive, and the countless times my family had manipulated her, masked their greed with smiles and soft words. Anger coiled in my chest, hot and insistent, demanding something be done. I shifted in bed, trying to slow my breathing, but the adrenaline kept me alert, restless, pacing the small apartment like a caged animal. Memories came unbidden. I saw myself as a child, watching Dad hover over Grandma's checkbook, Aunt Linda questioning her decisions, Rick smirking when she resisted. I remembered evenings spent in the living room, pretending to read while my father whispered over her shoulder, subtly undermining her authority. I remembered the letter from the estate lawyer that had revealed the depth of their scheme, and how Grandma had confided in me afterward, her voice barely audible. "One day, you may need to help me." I closed my eyes and imagined her alone, navigating their pressure without me. The thought made my stomach twist. Years of manipulation, subtle lies, exclusion, and now, the flash drive in my pocket was the key to confronting it all. I had to act. I rose from bed, walking barefoot across the hardwood floor. The cold seeped into my feet, grounding me as I stared out the window at the dim streetlights. I couldn't rely on anger alone. I needed strategy, patience, precision. The first step was understanding. I pulled out the flash drive, hesitating for a moment. It felt like holding a live wire, dangerous, electrifying. I plugged it into my laptop. The video opened slowly, the grainy footage of Grandma's living room filling the screen. My father, Aunt Linda, and Uncle Rick sat together, voices low, expressions calculating. Grandma's hands trembled as she resisted, her dignity intact but her fear palpable. I watched it frame by frame, noting every gesture, every pause, every subtle threat. Their manipulation was meticulous, rehearsed, and cruel. I realized that winning this wouldn't be about confrontation alone. It would be about exposing truth, systematically, carefully, so they couldn't deny it. Sleep was impossible, so I paced the apartment, sketching a plan. I listed every piece of evidence I needed. Copies of the will, bank statements, legal documents, recordings, witnesses. I reached out to Claire, an investigative journalist friend I trusted, explaining the situation without revealing the full story. Her advice was precise: organize, secure, backup. Protect Grandma. Gather proof. Be ready for resistance. Hours passed. The sky outside lightened, shifting from deep navy to pale gray. My body ached, but my resolve only strengthened. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, protecting the person who had always protected me. I realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was action despite it. By mid-morning, I had created a small war room in my apartment. The laptop sat at the center, surrounded by notebooks, sticky notes, and scanned documents. I cataloged every known instance of manipulation, every recorded conversation, every paper trail that tied my family to their scheme. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation of what would become justice. I sat back for a moment, hands trembling, heart pounding. Grandma had trusted me with this responsibility. And I understood now that the fire burning inside me wasn't anger alone, it was purpose. I realized I couldn't rush. Every misstep could backfire, could allow them to rewrite history or intimidate Grandma further. The path ahead required patience, strategy, and persistence. But for the first time, I felt the spark of hope, the knowledge that I could confront this, and that I would not fail. That night, when I finally allowed myself to lie down again, my mind was still racing, but the fire had transformed. It was no longer raw and chaotic. It was focused, disciplined, ready to guide every step I would take toward exposing the truth. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle alongside a growing sense of quiet determination. The inner fire had been lit, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I approached Grandma's apartment under the guise of helping her with groceries. Rain had left the streets slick, reflecting the dull light of early morning, and the air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and damp leaves. Inside, the familiar scent of lavender greeted me, calming yet bittersweet. Grandma handed me the code to her safe without hesitation. Inside, I found stacks of documents, the original will, insurance policies, and a carefully labeled folder of receipts and bank statements. I handled each item gently, aware that these were more than papers. They were her legacy, her shield against manipulation. My mind raced, piecing together the information with what I had already gleaned from the flash drive. I started creating a timeline, aligning events, conversations, and documents to paint a complete picture. I encrypted digital copies and stored backups in multiple locations. Every detail mattered. Signatures, dates, phrases that could reveal intent or highlight discrepancies. Each discovery felt like a small victory, but the weight of responsibility pressed down relentless. I reached out to Claire, who guided me through the next steps. You need evidence in multiple formats, she said. Not just the video. You need documents, witnesses, and a clear timeline. And make sure it's legally solid. Don't give them a chance to discredit you. I tried to contact the bank for verification of Grandma's account, only to be told I needed trustee permission. A wave of frustration hit me. It was always a step behind, always a hurdle meant to slow me down. But I persisted, documenting every attempt and refusal. Then came Aunt Linda's subtle manipulations. She visited Grandma under the guise of concern, hinting at my over-involvement, and trying to persuade her to hand over documents. I overheard snippets. Maybe it's too much for her to handle, she said in that saccharine tone, clearly hoping Grandma would doubt me. My stomach twisted. Their attempts to intimidate were relentless, but so was my determination. I experienced small victories alongside setbacks. I successfully scanned and backed up the will, but a storm knocked out my internet mid-upload, forcing me to repeat the painstaking process. I attempted to record a conversation with Rick, but he sensed my intent and left the room. Each failure tested my patience but also taught me resilience. At night, I would pace my apartment again, reviewing every piece of evidence, every detail in the video. I analyzed body language, tone, and expressions, the tiny tells of deceit, arrogance, and guilt. I imagined potential scenarios, confrontations at family gatherings, legal challenges, and emotional fallout. Each rehearsal made me sharper, more deliberate, more strategic. Grandma watched me quietly. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said one evening, her voice soft yet firm. But I saw her relief behind her worry, a silent acknowledgement that I was doing what she could not. She had prepared me, and now it was my turn to act. By the third week, a pattern emerged. Every attempt at intimidation or manipulation by Dad and Aunt Linda was predictable. They believed silence and subtle pressure would win, but I had patience, documentation, and clarity. I realized strategy wasn't about brute force. It was about timing, observation, and using their own arrogance against them. Despite all my planning, doubt lingered. Nights were restless. What if Grandma's trust in me had been misplaced? What if I missed something? But every morning, as I revisited the flash drive, the will, and the documents, that doubt softened. The evidence was solid, the plan coherent. I was ready. I knew the climactic moment had to be controlled, deliberate, and public enough that denial or intimidation would fail. It wasn't about dramatics. It was about precision. Every setback, every failed attempt, had honed my approach. I was learning that real power lay in careful, unwavering preparation. By the end of the month, the pieces were in place. Documents verified, video analyzed, witnesses contacted. My strategy had transformed from tentative attempts to a comprehensive blueprint for truth and justice. And through it all, the fire inside me had become steady, disciplined, unyielding, ready to illuminate the betrayal my family had tried to hide. The day arrived like a storm waiting to break. Grandma had agreed to host a family meeting, a pretense that made the others think it was routine. But I knew differently. I arrived early, carrying the flash drive, printed copies of the will, bank statements, and the timeline I had painstakingly compiled. My palms were damp, but my mind was razor-sharp. This was the moment we had prepared for. Inside the living room, I arranged the space carefully. Chairs were in a semicircle, ensuring everyone could see the screen I had set up. The projector hummed softly as I connected the laptop, the cables snaking across the carpet like silent witnesses. Grandma sat beside me, calm yet visibly tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She gave me a small nod, a silent reassurance that I was ready. The first to arrive was Dad. His posture was confident, his smile polite, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. Aunt Linda followed, glancing around with feigned curiosity, adjusting her necklace. Rick came last, leaning back in his chair, casual but alert. None of them suspected the meticulous setup waiting for them. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "There's something important we need to discuss regarding Grandma's estate." Dad's eyebrow lifted, skepticism flickering across his features. "Estate? I thought we were finalizing the trust." I pressed play. The screen flickered, and the video from the flash drive filled it. The grainy footage of the living room at Grandma's dinner replayed in real time. Dad, Aunt Linda, and Rick sat together, speaking in hushed tones, their voices sharp and calculating. Grandma's hands shook as she resisted, her dignity intact but her fear unmistakable. Every movement, every phrase was captured. The camera had preserved subtle gestures. Dad's tense shoulders, Aunt Linda's smirk, Rick's fleeting glance to gauge reactions. Their plan was laid bare: manipulation, coercion, deceit. "Is this?" Dad stammered, eyes darting to Grandma. "Yes," I said firmly, voice rising slightly. "This is the truth of what's been happening behind the scenes. Every word, every action documented." Grandma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered, looking at me. I held up the printed timeline and copies of the will. "Here's the documented proof." Grandpa's wishes were clear. Equal shares for all children, including grandchildren. "This is legally verified." Aunt Linda's smile faltered. We didn't mean for it to look like that." Rick's smirk disappeared entirely, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. Dad's hands clenched in his lap, knuckles white. Their composure cracked under the weight of evidence. I also have verified bank statements and witness accounts. I continued, placing a folder on the coffee table. Everything is cross-checked, recorded, and backed up. Any attempt to manipulate or falsify facts will be immediately exposed. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the projector and the faint ticking of the wall clock. The tension was thick enough to taste. I could feel every heartbeat, every intake of breath, like a drumbeat signaling the truth's arrival. Aunt Linda opened her mouth, closed it, then finally muttered, I didn't realize it would be so transparent. I finished, voice calm but unwavering. Everything is transparent. You underestimated Grandma's foresight and the patience of those who love her. Grandma placed her hand over mine, her grip steady, grounding me. You've done what I could not, she said softly. You've protected our family's integrity. Dad attempted to interrupt, a desperate attempt at damage control. We were only trying to help. No, I said firmly, locking eyes with him. You were trying to control. The difference is clear, and now everyone sees it. I watched their faces as the realization sank in. Shock, guilt, panic, a mixture of emotions played across their features. I felt no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet sense of justice, a deep breath of relief for Grandma and for myself. Neighbors who had been called as witnesses nodded quietly, confirming the authenticity of documents and the events recorded in the video. Even those who had doubted the gravity of the situation now understood the full extent of the manipulation. I suppose we have no choice but to follow the legal terms, Aunt Linda finally said, her voice small, stripped of the confidence she usually wielded like armor. Yes, Grandma said, calm and measured. That's correct. And let this be a lesson, dignity and truth cannot be rewritten. Rick slumped back, silent, while Dad's jaw tightened, the weight of undeniable truth pressing down on him. They had been exposed, but not humiliated unnecessarily. The confrontation had been precise, deliberate, controlled, exactly as it needed to be. I closed the folder, shutting my laptop. It's over, I said. Not as punishment, but as a correction. Respect the truth. Respect Grandma. Grandma exhaled, a long, trembling breath that carried relief, release, and a newfound lightness. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks, her eyes softening. I realized in that moment that this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance, reclaiming integrity, and protecting the person who had always been our family's anchor. The fire inside me had transformed into calm clarity, the quiet, unwavering knowledge that truth, once revealed, has a weight no deceit can overcome. As the family sat in stunned silence, I felt a profound shift. The room, once heavy with tension, seemed lighter, warmer. The threat of control had evaporated, leaving only the clarity of justice. Grandma squeezed my hand. Thank you, she whispered again, for seeing what I could not fight alone. And in that moment, I knew the battle had been won, not with anger, but with patience, evidence, and unwavering resolve. The days after the revelation felt almost surreal. Grandma and I moved slowly through our routines, each action quiet but weighted with relief. The house no longer carried that tense energy, that invisible pressure that had always hovered in the corners. Instead, there was space, physical and emotional, and it felt almost foreign at first. Grandma was more relaxed during our mornings. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, filling the kitchen with its familiar hum. She hummed a tune she hadn't sung in years while preparing breakfast, her hands moving with ease and confidence. I watched her, feeling a mix of pride and tenderness. For years, she had carried the weight of manipulation silently. Now, she could finally breathe. I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor that made my chest tighten with quiet joy. She laughed more freely, even in the presence of neighbors and friends who had long been witnesses to her composed restraint. Her eyes sparkled again, that unmistakable combination of wisdom and warmth. And she no longer flinched when Dad, Aunt Linda, or Rick visited. She simply maintained her boundaries, polite yet unshakable. I too was changing. The fire that had driven me through sleepless nights and meticulous planning had softened into a steady flame. I could sit in the living room without the constant tension clawing at my chest. I could sip my coffee while listening to Grandma talk about her day, without calculating every potential manipulation. The world felt calmer, clearer, as though the weight of secrecy and betrayal had finally lifted. Yet the lessons remained. I continued to catalog documents, keep backups, and maintain a careful record of events, not out of paranoia, but from respect for the truth and the people who had trusted me. Grandma would sometimes watch me from across the room, a small smile on her lips, her eyes silently saying, "You've learned well." Family interactions became tentative, but more genuine. Dad, Aunt Linda, and Rick were quieter, more measured. They no longer attempted subtle manipulations, aware that their previous tactics had been exposed and could not succeed again. There was an unspoken truce, one based not on trust, but on undeniable truth. One evening, Grandma and I sat on her balcony, the city lights twinkling beneath us like scattered jewels. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. I held a mug of tea, feeling its warmth seep into my hands. Grandma rested her elbow on the railing, her chin in her palm, staring at the distant skyline. "You did more than protect me," she said softly. "You reminded me that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply needs to exist, and we must have the courage to recognize it." I nodded, the weight of her words settling into me. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without you trusting me with that responsibility." She smiled, eyes gleaming. "You've grown stronger, steadier. I see it in the way you carry yourself now." In the quiet that followed, I reflected on the months leading up to this moment. The sleepless nights, the meticulous planning, the setbacks and small victories. Each experience had shaped me, forging a resilience I hadn't realized I possessed. I felt a newfound confidence, not arrogant or boastful, but quiet and grounded. I understood now that justice was rarely about confrontation or spectacle. It was about patience, observation, and unwavering commitment to truth. Grandma turned to me, placing her hand over mine. "I feel like I can finally enjoy my days again," she said. "And it's because you fought, not with anger, but with care and clarity. That's rare." I realized she was right. The drive for revenge, the temptation to humiliate or punish, had never been my goal. My aim had always been protection and restoration. In the process, I had discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had, a quiet fire that could guide action without consuming it. The family began to shift in small, meaningful ways. Conversations became more honest, boundaries more respected. I saw moments where Dad would hesitate before offering unsolicited advice, where Aunt Linda's smiles lacked their previous manipulative edge. And even Rick seemed less performative, more self-aware. It wasn't perfect, some wounds ran deep, and not every behavior changed, but the foundation of truth was now undeniable. I also began to notice my own patterns. The pacing, the sleepless nights, the obsessive reviewing of evidence. They had been necessary, but I learned to balance vigilance with rest, reflection with action. I realized the importance of quiet moments, of stepping back to observe without reacting immediately. This balance gave me clarity and prevented burnout, allowing me to act decisively when it truly mattered. Weeks turned into months. Grandma resumed hosting small gatherings, and I found myself assisting, but in a different way, supportive, patient, calm. The atmosphere was lighter, freer, and the joy in her eyes was tangible. I sometimes caught her glancing at me during meals, a small nod of acknowledgement, a reminder of the bond we had strengthened through shared struggle. Most importantly, I learned to carry the lessons beyond her apartment. Respect, vigilance, patience, and unwavering commitment to truth. These were tools I could apply in every corner of my life. I felt more grounded, more capable of navigating challenges with integrity, and more attuned to the subtleties of human behavior. Sitting in the quiet living room one evening, the hum of the heater in the background, I realized the transformation wasn't just about exposing betrayal. It was about reclaiming dignity, not only for Grandma but for myself. The weight of responsibility had shaped me, forged resilience and insight, and taught me that quiet, persistent action could create profound change. For the first time in years, I felt fully present, fully alive, and fully capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. And beside me, Grandma's gentle breathing reminded me that the most powerful victories were often the ones fought and won in silence, guided by truth, care, and unwavering resolve. I've come to realize that life doesn't always announce betrayal with loud crashes. Sometimes it whispers, hides behind polite smiles, and creeps quietly into the corners of our lives. And yet, truth has a weight that cannot be denied. It waits, patient and steadfast, until someone has the courage to see it, hold it, and act. The flash drive Grandma slipped to me that night was more than evidence. It was a test of vigilance, a call to responsibility, and a symbol of trust that ran deeper than any document or photograph could capture. Holding it, I felt the years of subtle manipulation, the quiet oppression, the moments when power had been misused. And in those moments, I understood the responsibility I carried, not for vengeance, but for restoration. Walking through the aftermath, I learned that courage is rarely loud. It is the quiet fire that keeps you awake, pacing, thinking, planning, steady and unyielding. It is the patience to wait, the clarity to see through lies, and the discipline to act decisively when the time is right. Grandma had taught me this, even before I fully understood it myself. Now, when I sit with her in the morning sunlight, or listen to her hum a tune she hadn't sung in years, I see the reward of our patience and vigilance. Not the humiliation of wrongdoers, but the reclamation of dignity, the restoration of justice, the quiet triumph of truth. That, I realize, is far more powerful than any fleeting anger or retribution could ever be. Sometimes I hold the flash drive in my hand and feel its cold plastic edges, a simple object that carries a lifetime of lessons. I smile quietly, thinking of the invisible threads that connect love, trust, and responsibility. They are fragile yet unbreakable when handled with care, and I now understand the strength it takes to protect them. Life will continue to challenge us, to test our resolve in ways both large and small. But I have learned that truth, patience, and quiet courage are forces that endure. And as I walk through the world, carrying both lessons and memories, I know this. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, you have to be ready to listen.